welcome to the first in a series of 5 tutorials focused on environments. My name is Ty and I'm from Daz3d. In this particular tutorial, I'm going to show you how I set up Daz Studio. We're going to change some of the layout, we're going to add a few hotkeys, and we're going to set up our viewports. Then we're going to go over some quick tricks that should really help you maximize your creativity and Daz content as a whole. So first things first, you're going to see this main viewport. You're going to see this little 16:9 safe zone. It's kind of cropped, but that's only because of my render settings. So we're going to go up to render settings, and we're going to quickly change this. So by resetting this away from a proper render output, it'll fill the screen. So we're changing it from custom to active viewport. Now the render space is the entire active viewport, which is great because we want to see everything. We don't want to have this crop right now. We don't need the TV safe. So one of the most important things you know is now how to navigate. So you're going to hold down Control and Alt, and by clicking your left mouse button, you can rotate, move the camera around. Your right mouse button, you can pan around. And with your mouse wheel, you can let go of Control Alt and you roll your mouse wheel in and out. You can also do that from the controls up here by clicking and then dragging left and right and slide back and forth. Or you can rotate, same thing with pan, you can zoom. And then, there's also this navigation box, which you'll be used to if you've used other 3D packages like Maya, Max, Blender. You can click on front, you can click on back, click on top, and it'll automatically pop around. It's pretty handy, but honestly, I don't think there's any better way to navigate than just using Control Alt and having full freedom with the 3 mouse buttons. That's how I do it, and that's how I'll be doing it in these tutorials. But that gives you a quick kind of rundown of how you can navigate around your viewport. So whatever works for you. We're going to go into a little bit more viewport detail a little later on, once we've set the scene up the way we like it. But first things first, we're going to start closing down panes and moving panes around. So we have Auxilary Viewport, which is actually super handy. So we're going to drag it up right beside Viewport, so we can toggle between the two. This is really going to help us out later. So trust me on that. You're going to want Auxilary Viewport there, because we just really want those two options. We can get rid of Render Library. We don't need it. We just want those two in that tab. And then over here we have Scene and we have Environment. We want to keep Scene, but we want to get rid of Environment. Then down here we have Parameters. Parameters can be really helpful. Shaping we don't need. Face Transfer, don't need. Posing we don't need. We're going to keep Surfaces. We're going to close Lights, and then we're going to close Cameras. Now, all these panes we're closing, you can come up to Window, Panes, and reopen any of them. They're all right there. You can put them back, dock them where you want, but right now we're just going to clear out the clutter. So we want to get the most bang for our buck and really boil down to the panes we're really going to use. So people who use Maya or any other package will be familiar with Scene and Parameters. Parameters is like the channel box, and Scene is like your outliner. And so then on this side, we have Smart Content, Simulation Settings, and all these other ones. We're going to start killing the ones we don't need. We're going to keep Content Library, and we're going to keep Smart Content. We're actually going to change how they work, though. And we're going to use Content Library more as our primary, and Smart as a second. Now in Smart Content, we're going to turn off Filter by Context. It just makes things a little bit easier to navigate. Right now, it's Filter by Context tries to keep track of just what you need. It tries to guess. And now one little thing I do, because I'm an old school 3D artist, is I move the tools and I stack them on the side. Because I want to be able to hide everything and have a really, really good access to my viewport. So I can really see what I'm doing and really maximize my screen real estate. So by having the tools on the left here, it just really opens up the whole screen. So the next thing I want to do is change how this looks. So we're going to change the layout of our content library. We're going to change the display to File, but what we're going to actually do is change it to be View as List. And this is a preference. You can have it as thumbnails or you can have it as a list. I'm going to leave it as icons though, because I like to move around. But what's cool about this layout is now we can go to Daz Studio, my Daz3d library, and I'm going to just open this up, get a little bit more space, props, and etc. And everything is nicely laid out and organized. This really helps you get through your files really easy and smooth. So now you see this temp file, and now you see some scenes in here. And this is kind of cheating because this is what we're building towards, but in these like tutorials. But this temp folder is created by me. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to want to create this folder for yourselves. So what you're going to do is deselect everything, and you're going to right click and go add base directory. It's going to bring you to your Daz Studio, my library. And you can go anywhere you want on your computer, but I leave it here just to keep the folder structure consistent, and I don't have to go look for it. I know where to find it. So I created this temp folder, click on that, hit select folder, and it'll just create a pop-up that says it added it. So now you can select that folder, go down there to the plus button, and hit scene. And what that's going to do is going to let you save a new scene. So we just want to call this tutorial 01 and save. Now what that does is it creates a new scene down here. And there you go, there you see it. And now it allows us to hit Control S and save our scene. And like when you're working in 3D, a lot of times you're going to test things, it's going to strain your CPU, and there will be times where things will crash, trust me. So what we want to be able to do is have a scene saved, and every 30 seconds, 40 seconds to a minute, you want to hit Control S. You're never going to be upset that you had an extra save, but you're definitely going to be upset if you don't save and you lose your scene. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through some hotkey setups. Actually, no, we're actually going to go back into Content Library, My 3D Library, Scripts. And what we want to do is we want to actually add a script. So we'll navigate to this by right-click, go Browse to Folder Location, and inside the scene file you donated, there's a script called View Tool Toggle Snapping. So you want to paste that in this scripts folder. Once you've done that, it'll appear here. We select that, we right-click, and we go Create Custom Action. Now this is a really cool tool. So you accept that, hit OK. This is a really cool, handy thing that I'm going to show you how it works. So you're going to want that. So once that's there, it's good. Now we're going to hit F3, and we're going to rip through creating some hotkeys. So the first one is under Custom, and you're going to see that View Toggle Snapping. We're going to right-click and say Change Keyboard Shortcut. And we're going to change that to S. This will say S is already being mapped, but that's okay, just accept it. We're going to remove S and a few others anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now we're going to go to Edit, and it's the next one we want. And we're going to go down and find Duplicate Nodes and Duplicate Node Hierarchies. You won't actually have duplicate node hierarchies as a hotkey, so we're going to set Control-Shift-D as our hotkey, and I'll show you what that does in a sec. And then we're going to change duplicate nodes to Control-D. So this allows us to duplicate things really fast. It's going to make your life so much easier. Really just speeds up our workflow. Then we're going to have view controls. By default, Daz allows you to navigate with WADs, W-A-D-S, but here we're actually going to change that because that's actually, I hit that by accident all the time. And by leaving WADs in place, you might actually bump it. So what we're going to actually do is clear these keyboard controls out. We're going to get rid of them. We don't want them, and I definitely don't use them. It causes me more grief than help. So if you're used to this, if this is part of your workflow, if you're a Daz user, leave it. But if you're not and you're willing to learn, yeah, trust me, stick with me here, clear that out. All right, and then we're going to want frame. We want to change frame selection. You won't have a key here, but we're going to set it to Control F. We're going to use this a lot, like a lot. That's an important one to have. Now we're going to go down to Viewport Tools, and we're going to change a lot of these. So node selection, we're going to change to Q. Universal, we're going to change to Control T. Rotate, we're going to change to E. Translate, we're going to change to W. And scale, we're going to change to R. Pretty much mimicking Maya or Unity. So if you're comfortable with those, it's just gonna make your life a lot easier. It's what I'm used to. So it's what I use. So it just, again, quality of life. So then we're gonna go to render. And then what we're gonna change in render, by default, Daz has render as Control R and render settings as Control Shift R. I like to switch those myself because I want to more likely bring up render settings than accidentally render a scene. So if I hit Control R, I don't want to actually instantly start a render. I just want to open render settings. Whereas if you accidentally hit Control R and render, you got to wait until the render establishes. But I just want to quickly view the settings. So I swap these. All right, so we're going to hit apply. And then what we're going to do, so we don't lose our settings, we are actually going to export our settings. And we go down to actions and save our actions. And we're going to call those, you can see I already got tie layout, tie actions 2. We're going to call this tutorial 1 actions. Save. That way we can always import those back if we need them. So we apply that. And there's another setting we're going to use quite a bit. So I'm going to show you that now. And that'll make this a little bit easier. So we'll accept that. All right. So we're going to create a sphere so we can show off some of the stuff we're going to do. So go create, new primitive, and we're going to pick a sphere. World center's fine. All that's good. So accept. Now we have our sphere. Now we can use Control F to frame. Now remember that script we installed. When you need to rotate, we rotate it as we want. But if we hit S now, we can rotate on the 15s. So it snaps to the rotate, which is super powerful. So you can imagine rotating something 180 degrees, rotating something 90 degrees. It just gives us a lot of control and flexibility. Same thing with translate. So we hit S. So this is W without S. Now we hit S, and now you see it moves a certain set of units. So again, super handy. Okay. So that works for what we want to do. But what we're missing now is how to manipulate those things. So we're going to hit Control D to duplicate our sphere. Now if we grab both these spheres and I try and move them, watch what happens. Both spheres are selected. You can see them both selected up in the scene pane. And those are the parameters we were talking about, just like Maya. You can translate with the slider. You can rotate with the slider. And you can scale, just like the channel box. There's other parameters in here too, like display. You can make it unselectable in the viewport, but you can still select it up here. You can turn the visibility off in the viewport. You can make it invisible altogether, or you can make it only not visible in render, which is super handy if you want to create layers in your scene. And visible in simulation, all really handy tools. Really good to know. So back to our sphere. If I select both spheres and try and move them, your assumption would be they both move, but they don't. By default, Daz only moves one of them. So what we have to do, there's two options. You can parent the sphere to the second sphere, and to do that, you select the sphere and drag it into the other sphere. And now you can open and close it and see that it's now a child of the sphere. And from that sphere, I can now move both of them, which is fine, and that gets you kind of part of the way, but you don't have to parent something every time. So we're going to drag this out and unparent it. And what we're going to do now is go Window, Panes, and grab one called Tool Settings. And then what we're going to actually do with Tool Settings is we're going to nest this under Scenes, because we actually use this quite a lot. It gives a lot of flexibility. And so now what we want to do is go down to Universal in the dropdown, and we want to turn on Secondary Node. Then we want to do that for Rotate, and we want to do that for Translate, and we want to do that for Scale. Now what that's going to do, and when we select both spheres and we scale them, see they're both going to scale. Rotate, we rotate both on their local axis, and translate. Now, when we want to move them, they move together. Now we don't have to parent them every time. We can just select them both and move them around. The other thing I wanted to show you is if I did parent this, if I parent something, it gives me a lot of flexibility. If I select the parent, if I select both and come down to the parameters tool, I can select both in the parameters down there and go to their visibility. As a pair, see two visible, and I can turn both off at once. So that's really, really nice. And that's going to help us later as we get busier scenes. Now, if you select a primary sphere, I can hit Control-Shift-D, which we set up earlier, and that's the duplicate hierarchy nodes. And it duplicates the entire hierarchy. So it'll copy, you see how it copied the exact same two spheres and kept the same parenting. So that's super handy. And so I can select both and I can delete it. Then I can change the names by just clicking on the text. We're going to use that later, so remember that. And right now, in our perspective view, main viewport, we currently set to texture shaded. Smooth shaded is nice, and hidden line removal is really nice. Most people are familiar with wireframe. And if I duplicate this object, you can see right through it. I'm going to Control-D, and you can see all the wires that build this object. You see through them. So now if I change this to hidden line removal, it's as lightweight as wireframe, but it gives me a sense of depth because it occludes the background objects, so they cut each other out. So that's really nice. Now, if I was to change this to top view, every single time I wanted to switch to wireframe so I could see through things, I would have to come through and manually change this texture shaded to wireframe every time. Now that's going to slow you down. We don't want to do that. So we come into our auxiliary viewport, which we saved earlier. We change that to top view. We change that guy to wireframe. I can now switch between viewport. So I can leave this in perspective and this one in top view. And I can change this to front view, side view, whatever. And now I have this handy second viewport that allows me to do that kind of navigation and detail things. Imagine I was putting things on top of each other. So we hit Control-D, we duplicate it, we line it up. I would be able to really see where that layout is and how it lines up without messing my initial viewport. So another neat trick I'm going to show you. But first things first, let's save our workspace. So Windows, Workspace, Save Layout As. And we'll call this Tutorial 01 Layout. And what this is going to do is it's going to save all the things we've done, the panes, the layout. So if you ever lose it, you can come back. So for whatever reason, your layout resets. Go Viewport, Workspace, and select Layout. And in here, you'll see Tutorial Layouts. And you can jump back to where you are and you don't lose all this work. So that's super handy. So remember this tool settings we set? Well, if you look at our sphere from the side view, you can see that the pivot is at the very bottom. So if we duplicate this sphere, and let's say we want it to be like a stack of spheres. We want the sphere to be right on top. There's two ways we can do this. We can eyeball it, duplicate, and put it there, and it's pretty close. Okay. And that gives a wide translation of about 100. And we duplicate it again. And if we didn't have such an easy number as 100, we wouldn't keep that consistency. So now we're at 199 instead of 2 and so on and so forth. It's going to start getting off kilter. It won't be perfectly aligned. But if it's 100, because we know that, we can actually hit this widget. See this little gear? We click on that and go to parameter settings. We can actually change the nudge for the sphere. We can set it to 100. So this is based on centimeters. Good to know that. That's the units. But now we know it nudges 100. So if we duplicate the sphere again and come over here to Y translate and just hit plus, it'll automatically move 100 U's. Control F and you can see it. By the way, Control F with something selected will frame the thing you select. But if you hit Q and select nothing and hit Control F, it'll show you the full scene. So that's a really handy tool. Use it all the time. So now if we duplicate the sphere again, nudge it up another, now you can imagine we're stacking these perfectly and they line up perfect. Imagine if you're stacking things, lining up walls, you have the ability to do very easily, very quickly, line things up accurately and precisely and quickly. See how fast this is? Duplicate, nudge, duplicate, nudge. You can see how powerful that is. So super handy trick, good to know. Now imagine, let's delete a bunch of these guys. Let's imagine our pivot isn't where we want it. So we'll frame on the sphere. The pivot currently is at the very bottom. What if we wanted it in the center of the object? Well, we know this sphere now is 100 units high. So what we can do is actually go to our tools and go to joint editor. So the tool is called joint editor. Alt-Shift-J is the default hotkey, and open up joint editor. You're going to see a red joint and a green joint. We don't really have to worry about the red look at joint, but if we select the green guy, he actually has his own values, and we can manipulate those to make sure he's exactly halfway. We can see the actual Y, X positions for the actual pivot itself. We can move it with these sliders or type in our values. So here in Y position, we can just type in 50. And we now know it's dead center because we know the other two are zeroed out. And because we know the sphere is 100, it's dead center in our sphere. You can see that. And if you change the orientation of the pivot, you'll see the boundary meshes. But we're actually going to go to the sphere itself and close joint editor, go to select. If we go to rotate, we can now rotate on the pole. Our sphere rotates like you'd expect. Like imagine if you were doing a planet or anything like that, or a basketball spinning, you would want it to spin on its poles, not from the point. You want it to spin from the center point, right? So it becomes a lot more valuable because you can actually rotate it. I just turned on the wireframe so you can see it instead of rotating like that from the base pivot. So by moving the joint around, you can control how you can manipulate it. Okay, so in summary, here are some of the tips and tricks we covered in this tutorial. Save your work constantly. You will never regret having too many saves. I showed you how to use the auxiliary viewport as a secondary viewport. So you have a second viewport in wireframe you can leave as top or side. So you don't have to switch both camera and shader every time you move between your views. And remember, wireframe is great to see through things, whereas hidden line removal is great to show depth. But both are lightweight shaders and will help you navigate heavy scenes quickly. I showed you how to set up your content library and remove any excess clutter so you can see what you need in Daz at your fingertips. And then I showed you how to set up hotkeys that make sense to you, to help you move quickly and efficiently and not have to dig through menus. And then I showed you how to save your workspace and save your actions so that you're not having to do this every time you load Daz Studio. So thank you for listening, and join us for the next environment series tutorial, one where we will help you think like a storyteller so you can achieve your vision.